"Ma'am, we need to search your bag immediately," the flight attendant announced, loud enough for every first-class passenger to hear. As phones came out and whispers filled the cabin, Agent Tiana Monroe calmly stood, eyes locked on the woman trying to frame her, and said with quiet steel, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." What no one knew was that the so-called suspect was actually a top federal agent, and she had recorded everything. At 41, Agent Tiana Monroe didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not anymore. A 2-decade veteran of military intelligence and now the newly appointed head of Homeland Security's Undercover Aviation Integrity Task Force, she'd earned every stripe, every clearance, every whispered nod of respect in rooms filled with power. But she also knew the battlefield had shifted. Her mission today wasn't in a war zone or a foreign country. It was cruising 35,000 feet above the United States, in first class, aboard Flight 1769 from Miami to San Francisco. Her target, a suspected drug smuggling operation using commercial flight crews to move high-value narcotics across state lines. Her assignment, observe, identify, and confirm without blowing her cover. To the world, she was just another sharply dressed woman in Seat 3A, an early boarding first-class passenger with a preference for ginger tea and noise-canceling headphones. But beneath her calm demeanor was a mind running sharp and fast, cataloging everything, watching everyone, and most importantly, recording everything with the high-tech microcamera hidden in her silver tie pin. The tension entered the cabin with the arrival of flight attendant Carly Benson. At 34, Carly was the picture of airline professionalism, or so she tried to appear. Platinum blonde hair pulled into a neat bun, uniform tailored to perfection, a warm smile rehearsed to automaticity. But Tiana had read her file. What most passengers would see as confidence, Tiana saw as concealment. A woman drowning in personal debt. A disciplinary record hidden under HR euphemisms. And a pattern of complaints involving passengers of color that never made it past internal review. When Carly scanned the first-class cabin and locked eyes with Tiana, something shifted. It was subtle, just a moment of stiffness, the forced smile twitching at the corner, but Tiana caught it. To Carly, this wasn't just another passenger. This was a disruption. A threat. The only black woman in first class, alone, confident, and composed. Carly walked by without offering a greeting. Tiana noted it. The man in 3C got a welcome aboard, sir, and a quick joke about complimentary champagne. The woman in 2A received a warm smile and the offer of a pre-departure drink. But when Carly reached Tiana's row, her voice was clipped. "Anything to drink?" she asked, omitting the ma'am she'd used with every other passenger. "Sparkling water, please," Tiana replied, polite but observant. Carly returned with the water and dropped it, placed it too abruptly, on the tray. Not enough to spill, but enough to make a point. Tiana made another mental note. Bias, like contraband, often hides in plain sight. As boarding continued, Tiana observed the rest of the crew. A young male flight attendant, Derek Shaw, hovered near Carly, exchanging hushed tones when passengers weren't watching. Their chemistry was off, too familiar, too conspiratorial. When a black suitcase was loaded by a baggage handler with a mismatched badge, Tiana made another mental entry. All of it was being logged in her secure app, disguised to look like a flight review app but syncing in real time with DHS servers. What Carly didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the woman she had just brushed off was sent specifically to watch her. The agency had flagged her travel patterns, her unscheduled lavatory breaks, her unusually high access to first-class luggage compartments, and most importantly, her growing bank deposits despite no record of raises or bonuses. But Carly's resentment wasn't just financial, it was racial, historical, systemic. Months ago, she'd applied for a lead flight attendant position and lost it to a black woman named Janelle, a decision she described to coworkers as typical diversity politics. That bitterness had metastasized into something far uglier. To Carly, people like Tiana didn't belong in first class unless they were celebrities or athletes. They certainly weren't meant to be the ones watching her. As the plane leveled off into cruising altitude, Carly's paranoia deepened. She noticed Tiana's quiet intensity. How she scanned the cabin, how she seemed to be listening to every exchange. Carly knew she was being watched. And she couldn't afford it. Not with a vacuum-sealed package of high-grade opioids hidden in her personal bag, ready to be discreetly transferred in the first-class lavatory. She'd already passed one package to a passenger earlier, a well-dressed man who walked out of the bathroom patting his jacket. But this second package, this one made her nervous. She retreated to the galley, hands trembling as she opened her makeup bag and stared at the second packet, her payment. She was supposed to sell it later. But now it had become something else, an insurance policy. A distraction. She looked toward the front of the cabin, where Tiana sat quietly, working on a tablet. A plan formed. Wait until she goes to the bathroom. Slip it into her handbag. Stage the discovery. Make her the story. No one would question it. Not with that look. Not with that skin. People always believe the worst when it confirms their biases. Carly had seen it happen before. And this time, she'd make sure the whole plane saw it happen live. Tiana stood and walked to the lavatory. Carly pounced. She rushed over under the guise of straightening the seat pillow, glancing around. Most passengers were engrossed in movies or dozing. Perfect. She reached into her apron and quickly slipped the small package into Tiana's open handbag, resting beside the seat. Her pulse thundered, but she smiled. She felt powerful. Untouchable. Tiana returned. Carly was there, now suddenly attentive. Just wanted to make sure your area was tidy, she offered, all syrup and smile. Tiana said nothing but scanned her bag with a trained glance. Something was off. Her instincts flared like sirens. She didn't touch the bag. She didn't react. She just took her seat, silently reaching to tap a command on her tie pin. Backup recording now active. Carly waited 20 minutes before making her move. She stepped into the galley and called the cockpit. "Captain, I believe a passenger in first class may be carrying something illegal. I saw her acting suspiciously. She fits the profile." "Do you want to initiate a search?" the captain asked. "Yes," Carly said, masking triumph as concern. "For the safety of everyone." Minutes later, Carly returned to Tiana's seat with Derek and an air marshal dressed in plain clothes. Her voice loud enough to draw attention, she declared, "Ma'am, we need to search your bag immediately." Tiana looked up calmly. "On what grounds?" "We received a report of illegal substances in your possession," Carly announced. Several phones lifted into the air, recording. "I do not consent to this search," Tiana said evenly. "It's not optional," the air marshal responded. Without waiting, Carly grabbed the handbag and, with a practiced motion, withdrew the planted packet. "This was in your bag," she said, holding it high like a courtroom prosecutor. Gasps rippled through first class. Passengers murmured. One woman muttered, "Unbelievable." Another whispered, "Of course." Tiana stood slowly, gathering her coat and dignity. She said nothing to the gawking passengers, but leaned in close to Carly and whispered, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Carly's smirk flickered, but she masked it quickly. The air marshal guided Tiana toward the rear of the plane. Cameras followed. The world would see what they thought was a drug bust. What they were actually witnessing was the beginning of an operation that would bring an entire criminal scheme, and the people who built it, crashing down. Tiana walked with her head high, a storm building behind her calm eyes. She wasn't the story Carly thought she was. She was the reckoning Carly never saw coming. Tiana Monroe had walked off that plane with her back straight and her silence louder than any protest. But as the airport security door closed behind her, leaving behind gasps, camera flashes, and a smugly satisfied flight attendant, everything shifted. She was no longer playing the role. She was back in control. What Carly Benson didn't know, what no one on Flight 1769 knew, was that every moment of that humiliating takedown had been recorded from a high-definition, encrypted microcamera nestled in the tie pin of a federal agent. And now, that evidence was en route to Washington, D.C., where justice wasn't just a hope, it was protocol. Less than 24 hours later, Tiana walked through the secure halls of Homeland Security's Covert Investigations Division in Arlington, her heels silent on polished floors, her face expressionless but focused. She entered a debrief room, nodding once to the man already waiting. Deputy Director Langston Pierce, a sharp-eyed veteran with 30 years of intelligence operations under his belt, didn't offer a greeting. He simply clicked his pen and said, "Show me." Tiana sat, removed the tie pin, and slid it across the table. She planted it while I was in the lavatory. Bold. Sloppy. Racist as hell. But she wasn't alone. Her colleague, Derek Shaw, age 30, played lookout. I flagged his movements too. The lights dimmed as the wall screen flickered to life. The footage was damning. Carly leaning over Tiana's seat. The quick, almost graceful slip of the small vacuum-sealed package into the handbag. The phony concern. The forced smile. Then the loud accusation. Every word. Every angle. Caught in crystal-clear detail. Pierce exhaled slowly. "You kept your cool." "Because it wasn't about me," Tiana replied. "It was about the system that lets women like her think they can weaponize race and get away with it." Again. He nodded. "The airline?" "Clueless," Tiana said. "But we've got leverage now." That leverage came faster than expected. Hours later, in the sleek, glass-paneled boardroom of Golden Republic Airlines, the mood had shifted from triumph to panic. The company's communications chief had just taken a call from DHS. The criminal Flight 1769 had ejected with such public spectacle was not only innocent, she was a federal operative embedded on an active mission. The CEO, Randall Kessler, a gray-haired executive with a reputation for polished charm and crisis aversion, stood at the head of the table, grim-faced. "Do we have footage?" "Internal?" "From the cabin?" "Yes, sir," replied the head of security, sliding a USB drive across the table. "But I think you need to see what DHS sent us first." The unedited tie-pin footage played for the executive team. By the time the final frame froze, Carly holding up the drug she herself had planted, the room was silent. "My God," someone whispered. "We've gone viral for the wrong reasons," said the PR director. "Our hero flight attendant is about to be a federal defendant." "We're not going to fix this with a press release," Kessler said sharply. "What does DHS want?" The answer arrived by phone minutes later. They didn't want silence. They wanted full cooperation. And they wanted Carly Benson and Derek Shaw to believe they were still in the clear, at least until they were in custody. The plan was laid out by DHS in coordination with Tiana. A recognition event. Company-wide. Framed as an honor for the flight crew who handled a mid-air security incident with composure. Carly would be there. So would Derek. Cameras, co-workers, applause, and a surprise they'd never forget. Meanwhile, Carly was enjoying the attention. Interviews. Online praise. An avalanche of messages lauding her bravery. In her mind, she had climbed from overworked flight attendant to viral hero in less than a day. "They're calling me a role model," she told Derek in the crew lounge, showing him her phone. "I'm doing a segment tomorrow with Sunrise News. They want to know how I stayed so calm." Derek looked uneasy. "You sure we're not overexposed?" Carly waved it off. "We're fine. Everyone saw what happened. They believed what happened. That's all that matters." But even as Carly posed for selfies and practiced her "just doing my job" soundbite in the mirror, federal agents were already trailing their supplier. Derek's banking transactions were under review. And Tyler, a former accomplice in a similar scheme, had quietly cut a deal to cooperate. The net was tightening. Fast. On the day of the event, the corporate auditorium was packed. Flight crews from across the country had been flown in. There were banners with Carly's name. Applause when her photo, smiling, saluting in uniform, flashed on the screen. She sat in the front row, glowing. Derek beside her, twitchy but compliant. The CEO stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to celebrate excellence, bravery, and security in the skies," Kessler began. "But before we honor our own, we're introducing a new position. One created in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security to lead a nationwide effort in aviation integrity." The room quieted. Carly leaned forward. "Please welcome Special Agent Tiana Monroe." The side doors opened. And there she was, dressed in a tailored Navy suit, badge gleaming, chin high. No longer a silent passenger. No longer alone. The murmurs began immediately. "Isn't that? That's the woman from the video. Wait, she's Homeland Security?" Carly froze. The blood drained from her face as Tiana walked calmly to the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Kessler," she said, her voice measured but clear. "Yesterday, I was accused of drug possession aboard Flight 1769. I was humiliated, recorded, and escorted off that plane in front of dozens of passengers. But I wasn't just a passenger. I was conducting a covert assessment of airline security vulnerabilities." Gasps rippled through the audience. "And what I discovered," she continued, "was not only a failure of procedure, but an abuse of power rooted in prejudice." The screen behind her came to life. It showed Carly planting the drugs, Derek passing coded signals, Tiana calmly observing. The trap, the confrontation, the setup, and the takedown. Carly stood. "That footage, this is fake." "You can't, sit down," a voice commanded. 2 federal agents moved in. "Carly Benson. Derek Shaw. You are under arrest for drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations." Derek's shoulders slumped. Carly's hands trembled. "You people always protect your own," she spat. The phrase hung in the air like poison. A black flight attendant in the back stood. "I've heard her talk like that for years," she said. "We all have. We just thought no one would believe us." Tiana turned back to the room. "That's the real danger. Not just the act, but the silence around it." As agents led Carly and Derek away, the applause was slow but steady. Not for revenge, but for truth. Tiana had not only exposed the crime, she had broken the code of complicity that kept it hidden. And she wasn't done yet. Because the real work, the hard work, was just beginning. The conference room at Golden Republic Airlines had never been that quiet. As federal agents led Carly Benson and Derek Shaw out in handcuffs, past stunned coworkers and the CEO who had just applauded them days earlier, the silence was suffocating. Tiana Monroe remained at the podium, her posture strong, her gaze unwavering. Her tie pin had captured it all. The setup, the betrayal, the evidence. But what had happened today wasn't just a dramatic arrest, it was a reckoning. One that exposed not only a smuggling ring hiding behind the veil of airline uniforms, but also something far more corrosive, the silent systems that let racial bias go unchecked in corporate America, especially at 35,000 feet. As the double doors closed behind the agents, the room seemed to exhale. Applause didn't follow. Not yet. People didn't clap when their illusions shattered. But what was born in that moment, somewhere between the shock and the shame, was awareness, and that would prove even more powerful. Over the next few days, Homeland Security worked with airline executives and federal prosecutors to track the scope of the smuggling operation. Tiana's mission had uncovered the tip of something far more expansive. Interviews with ground crew, audits of security logs, and analysis of staff travel patterns revealed that this wasn't a two-person job. It was a method. A playbook. One that had spread to at least 3 other domestic airlines, all operating the same model: move small, high-value packages using crew access, frame passengers of color if suspicion arose, and rely on the deep-seated biases of both passengers and security to keep the cover intact. The strategy had worked until it ran into someone like Tiana Monroe. By the end of the week, 6 more arrests were made. 3 flight attendants, 2 ramp agents, and one logistics contractor were taken into custody, each tied to different legs of the same conspiracy. Every one of them had been part of a system that thrived on racial profiling. Every one of them had assumed that no one would challenge their word against the silence of a falsely accused black passenger. They had gambled on the world seeing what it wanted to see. And they had lost. In response to the scandal, Golden Republic Airlines took unprecedented steps. CEO Randall Kessler, facing mounting public scrutiny and internal pressure from shareholders, issued a national statement not of denial, but accountability. "This is not just a criminal matter," he said at a press conference streamed across major networks. "This is a cultural failure. A failure of policies, of leadership, of moral vigilance. And we will change." The airline began implementing sweeping reforms within weeks. First came the mandatory anti-discrimination training, real training, not the check-the-box variety. Tiana herself was brought in to consult. Then came the formation of the Passenger Rights and Equity Unit, staffed by independent civil rights attorneys and aviation safety experts to handle complaints of discriminatory treatment. Every complaint would be reviewed by people with no corporate conflict of interest. Most importantly, security protocols were overhauled. No more unchecked crew bags. No more side entrances without dual authentication access. And new surveillance measures were installed across crew prep areas, lavatories, and galley zones, blind spots no longer. Tiana knew that procedures could prevent a repeat of Carly's crimes. But culture, that was the real battleground. And to fight that, she needed insiders. That's when she met Imani Davis. Imani had worked as a flight attendant for 18 years, most of them spent being overlooked, underestimated, and quietly sidelined by people like Carly. She had never filed a formal complaint. "I didn't think it would matter," she told Tiana during their first meeting at the airline's training center. "I saw the way things worked. You speak up, you become a problem. So I learned to keep my head down." Tiana leaned in. "I don't need someone who kept their head down. I need someone who kept their eyes open." Imani agreed to help lead the airline's cultural reform initiative. She co-designed new bias awareness simulations and helped review historic passenger complaint data. What emerged was a pattern so obvious in retrospect that it burned. Over a 5-year span, more than 80% of disturbance reports filed by staff against passengers were against people of color. Yet only 4% of those led to verified misconduct. The numbers had been there all along. No one had wanted to see them. But now, thanks to Tiana's work, they couldn't be ignored. Months passed. Carly Benson pled guilty to multiple counts of drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and filing false reports. The civil rights violation, targeting Tiana with deliberate racial bias, tacked on additional sentencing weight. The judge, referencing the viral footage and national outrage, sentenced Carly to 18 years in federal prison. Derek Shaw received 11 years in exchange for cooperation, while other co-conspirators faced sentences ranging from 5 to 14 years. Carly's fall from viral hero to convicted felon became a case study in media misdirection. The original video of her catching Tiana had amassed over 12 million views. But the unedited footage shared later by DHS, showing the truth, was what reshaped the conversation. Suddenly, news segments, podcasts, and panel shows were dissecting how easily perception could be manipulated by prejudice. How quickly America applauded a lie, because it confirmed what too many were conditioned to believe. In classrooms, community centers, and police academies, Tiana's story became a training module. And no one used it more effectively than Tiana herself. One morning at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia, Tiana stood before 30 new federal air marshals. The slide behind her showed a still image, Carly's hand reaching into a passenger's handbag, while casting a fake smile to the cabin. "This," Tiana began, "is what it looks like when bias turns into action. When prejudice becomes policy. When silence becomes complicity." She clicked to the next slide, her own booking photo, handcuffed, flanked by uniformed officers at the airport. "This is what it looks like when no one asks questions. When everyone assumes the worst. When justice depends on who's holding the camera and who gets believed. The marshals sat in stunned silence. But this, she said, clicking to the final image, her returning to the podium in the airline boardroom, credentials on full display, as two criminals were arrested beside her. This is what it looks like when we fight back. Later that evening, Tiana sat in her office, reviewing her case notes for submission to the Civil Rights Division. A manila envelope sat on her desk, handwritten and unmarked, except for the words, "Thank you." Inside was a letter. A flight attendant from a smaller airline, inspired by Tiana's story, had begun documenting the subtle ways passengers of color were treated differently, who got offered drinks, who got reported for attitude, who got asked to show ID again and again. "After your case went public, I couldn't stay quiet," the letter read. "We're finally seeing what we weren't supposed to see. And I've started speaking up. Because silence protects the wrong people." Tiana smiled faintly, placing the letter in a growing file. Not every mission ends in a takedown. Some end in momentum. In changed hearts. In new voices stepping forward. Her final report, Operation Cabin Clarity, would go on to be cited in congressional hearings on aviation reform. But it was her closing words, scrawled on the last page, that would be remembered long after the case closed. Justice is not just about punishment. It's about building systems where fairness isn't the exception, it's the rule. What happened to Agent Tiana Monroe on that flight is something too many people, especially people of color, know all too well. The sting of being judged not by your actions, but by your appearance. The pain of having your dignity questioned before you've spoken a single word. And the devastation of watching the truth get buried under the weight of assumption and bias. But this story wasn't just about injustice. It was about resilience. About a woman who, even in the face of public humiliation and false accusation, remained calm, focused, and determined to let the facts speak louder than the hate. Tiana didn't raise her voice, she raised the evidence. She didn't retaliate, she revealed. And in doing so, she changed not just her own story, but an entire system that had silently allowed discrimination to operate in plain sight. So what's the lesson here? It's this: injustice can only survive where silence is allowed to grow. Whether you're the one being mistreated or the one watching it happen, your voice matters. Your courage matters. Speaking up, documenting the truth, standing for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, is how change begins. It's not always dramatic. It might just be a quiet moment where you say, "That's not okay." But those moments add up. And they matter more than you know. This story also reminds us that accountability and reform only happen when we confront the systems, not just the individuals. Carly Benson was arrested, yes, but that's not the full victory. The real win came when the airline changed its training, reviewed its procedures, and created protections for future passengers. That happened because Tiana turned her personal pain into public progress. To our listeners, we want to thank you for caring, for watching, for sharing, for believing that these stories of injustice, of courage, of redemption, are worth telling. At us, Justice Stories, we're not just here to expose wrongs. We're here to uplift the people who fight for what's right. And if you've ever felt like your story didn't matter, let this be your reminder, it does. If this episode moved you, we invite you to leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us where you're tuning in from. Your voice helps us keep telling the truth. Until next time, stay aware, stay brave, and always stand for justice.